to the latest episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Mark Talamini, who is the Executive Director of the Northwell Health Physician Partner Group and a Senior Vice President for Operations. He's also a Professor of Surgery and has been known for many years as one of the great innovators in minimally invasive surgery. Originally born in New Jersey, he went to undergraduate and medical school in Hopkins and in fact stayed almost 30 years in Baltimore. He was rising steadily through the ranks of the Department of Surgery before he became chairman of the Department of Surgery on the other side of the country at the University of California in San Diego. He was there for almost 9 years before coming back east again, where he became chairman of the Department of Surgery in Stony Brook in 2013. In 2021, he joined Northwell Health, initially as a surgeon, and has now transferred to a largely executive and administrative role, developing operations as well as managing the physician partner group. He has much to say in this discussion about leadership, about how careers can send you in one direction or the other, the benefits of overseas clinical experience, and has also got some significant insights into where he sees the use of technology such as AI improving the life of the practicing surgeon. I hope you will like and subscribe to the channel and send your comments, please. So without further ado, let's go over and talk to Dr. Talamini. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives.
Good. Well, thank you for taking some time out of your busy day to join this little venture, Surgeons' Lives, which, as you probably know if you've seen any of the previous ones, is an effort just to broaden people from beyond the CV and the PubMed documents and stuff like that to what I call stuff that matters, and which is sometimes beyond the workplace. But just for everybody's benefit, it's usually very helpful to ask people to start with a few words about their early life and career, starting with the words "I was born in."
Well, I was born in Jersey, New Jersey. Father was an electronics engineer. Used to work for RCA here in New Jersey and was involved in early radar stuff. Very smart guy. I remember one time in high school, he did a bunch of top secret work towards the end of his career, and he would bring home gadgets that he would make. And he described that at one point he was involved in helping create a microphone inside of the little screw that gets put into the plugs in your house. You know, there's a little screw for the plate. And he had another project where they were using laser to sense the vibrations in windows to pick up speech inside of rooms. But at one point, when I was young, we would spend a lot of time in the basement making radios, Radio Shack, radio kits and things, because he had been a ham operator. And at one point he brought home a Nikon stereo microscope, and he called me into his bedroom. He said, "Mark, you got to come look at this. Come look at this." And what he had is one of the earliest integrated circuits underneath the microscope. And he said, "If you can believe it, there are 16 transistors and 8 diodes on that little piece that you're looking at under the stereo microscope." And of course, we had built whole radios with transistors that were, this big. and he said, "This is going to change the world." And this is back in, I don't know, 1970 or 1968 or whatever. So um, he gave me a great love for tech and geek stuff. Um, my mother was sort of the warm side, wonderful woman. I had two older sisters. It's a great advantage to have two older sisters if you're a young guy because you understand the female species much better if you have two older sisters. Um, so
You didn't,
grew up.
you didn't think by any chance, and I was interested with your dad with the microphone and the screw. You didn't think there was any possibility that he might have been working for the CIA or something?
Oh, he was working for. He was actually working for the NSA, which nobody called the NSA at that time. They would call it DOD, Department of Defense at Fort Meade. And when he would travel there, he would go under an assumed name. And there were ramifications for this. For instance, I loved music as a kid. I played music. At one point, I was considering a music career. And back in the 60s, I wanted to go to rock concerts like everybody else. He said, no, 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 no. You can't go to those. He said, that would threaten my security clearance. So you can't go.
Oh, there.
Uh,
So there for the grace of something, yeah, is a frustrated John Bon Jovi talking to us. Could it be you?
hardly. But anyway, most of my formative years were outside of Philadelphia in South Jersey in a little town called Morristown, Morstown. Another interesting thing, I met my wife in third grade. We dated through high school and eventually married when I was in medical school, but left that town to go down to Johns Hopkins in 1974 as a college undergraduate and wound up staying there for 30 years at Hopkins. So
The where did the medicine come from? Was it as you were in college, or was it earlier or later, or what?
my mother was always fascinated by medicine. She had a Merck's manual in the house, and I think she was a frustrated clinician of some sort. So I was very interested in medicine as a career when I was young, but I sort of put it aside. And in high school, I had an English teacher who was a very good English teacher. And at one point, she sort of knew I was interested in music or other pursuits. And at one point, she sat down with me and she said, you're really good at science and you're really good with people. You should think about a career in medicine. So she was right. And I honestly didn't think I would get into Johns Hopkins, but I had a guidance counselor who was convinced I could. And interestingly, we just recently had our, um, let's see, our 50th high school reunion.
Oh God,
And that guidance counselor was at the reunion. And I got to tell her, listen, you steered me in the right direction.
pretty good. So Hopkins, as you say, you went to Baltimore and stayed there for 30 years. As many people, and I don't know whether it's true to call it the golden age, but you certainly were in Hopkins at a time where there were a number of well-known figures, shall we say. I mean, obviously from John Cameron on downwards, and guys like you and Keith Lillimo, et cetera, et cetera. And almost all of you left in due course. I mean, at different times. What was, what was in your mind when you decided to leave? Because it's a very nurturing yet slightly controlling concept being in that place for the whole time.
So I would say two things. In general, in my career, uh, I sort of view myself as like Forrest Gump of American surgery. I got to see and either be part of or watch an awful lot of pretty amazing things happen in American surgery. And certainly one of them was being at Johns Hopkins and, watching the John Cameron School of Surgical Leadership evolve. Um, what I would say about that is he was very focused. I worked in his lab as a medical student. And, he was straight up. He said, Mark, we are here to train leaders in surgery.
Yeah.
If that's not what you want to do, this is not the right place for you. So it was very intentional, clear direction, and it's in part a demonstration of how one man's vision and persistence and greatness can do amazing things.
And you signed up for that, obviously. You somewhere in your psyche, either overtly or covertly, you clearly saw yourself as a leader.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story too. I've always been sort of a person of faith, and that was true in my younger years, and my wife as well. So when I first went to medical school, my wife was a nurse by training. Um, our clear goal was to do missionary medicine overseas. And in fact, in 1980, we spent 3 months in a hospital in Bangladesh that had been built by two American surgeons, which was a fabulous experience for us. But I remember telling Dr. Cameron in one of these sort of encounters, what do you want to do with your life? I said, well, Carol and I are going to be missionary couple overseas. And I don't know if you know who John Tarpley is, but Tarp had been he was I don't know 5-7 years ahead of me, and we knew Tarp really well and admired him tremendously. Most of that part of his career was in Obomashaw, Nigeria. He would come back every 3 or 4 years and spend a year in Baltimore at the VA.
Hey, just
So
passing, he's a previous guest on this podcast.
oh wow, that's one I got to listen to. He's
He is quite a piece of work.
a fabulous human being. He and Maggie are just great people and have had a huge influence on so many of us. But anyway, that's the direction, that we were planning on going. And I remember, and Dr. Cameron tells this story too, so I'm comfortable sharing it. When I told him that's what we were considering doing, there was a pause. And he looked me square in the eye and he said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're going to take a Hopkins education and you're going to throw it away in the jungles in Bangladesh. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. Now, Carol and I sort of learned that we aren't really cross-cultural people. And I would actually say being in Ireland for 6 months helped us to understand that we were not going to be great people wasn't going to be the right thing for us to spend most of our lives and careers overseas. So I sat back down with Dr. Cameron actually when I came back from Dublin. And I said, Dr. Cameron, you remember we talked about my career and wanting to be overseas? He said, yeah. And I said, well, you know what? It turns out that that's not what we're going to do. And he said, good. Because I can tell you from my perspective you will do much more good for the world and for humanity as an academic surgical leader than you ever could do operating on people one by one in the jungles of Bangladesh. So, you could perhaps argue that one way or the other, but from his point of view, my potential impact was much greater with what I've turned out to have done rather than our first plan.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could spend probably 2 days discussing the various merits of that and the role of a Nissen fundoplication in Bangladesh for subtle reflux might have a different position. But
Yeah.
obviously, as you pointed out, for listeners or viewers of this, the only reason that you succeeded in your career is, of course, your association with Irish people. Um, in Ireland, where you obviously underwent a little bit of missionary training there, and also a bunch of Irish people who went to Hopkins around those years as well.
Oh, yeah. Patty
So
Bro. Yeah.
yeah, so um, tell us, you know, did you enjoy the experience in Dublin, and why did you enjoy it, if you, or hated it for that matter?
Well, so let me just back up briefly to Bangladesh. That was an incredible experience. In 1980, Bangladesh was in a much worse place than it is now. We saw rabies, whooping cough, diphtheria, tetanus, polio in large numbers. So it was like going to a living class in medical history. And, I'm not getting political at this point, but, when people are skeptical with me about the power of vaccinations, it just makes no sense to me because I saw these diseases and what they do to people in an unvaccinated environment. Um, so that experience was really incredible. As a young, as a medical student working in the operating room, there was a tech there, a Bangladeshi tech. There were so many incarcerated hernias to do. They had trained him
Yeah.
to fix hernias, and he taught me as a medical student how to fix a hernia. First person to teach me that. So fast forward to Dublin. I think it was 1984 that we were there. Again, a fabulous experience, a far more independent surgical experience than was available in the United States at that time. And in a parallel fashion, Dublin was a very different place in 1984 than it is today. So it was a fabulous surgical experience. Professor David Boucher Hayes was my main mentor, worked with Patty Bro. My SHO was Era Darcy, now Lord Era Darcy, who during that 6 months was a fabulous friend. I mean, he was a couple of years behind me. I was the senior reg, he was the SHO, but we had a deep and abiding friendship. So it was really great. Cahill Kelly was one of my interns. So it was a great experience from a people point of view and a surgical point of view. Now, strangely, I've never been back. I don't know why, but it really was a very powerful time.
Never been back in 40 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you're right. Dublin is a different place. And in the 80s, there was no money in Ireland. Then the Celtic Tiger and great wealth. And, those people you mentioned, I mean, whatever happened to them, I wonder. O'Kelly, Paddy became president of the college,
Yeah.
the House of Lords, and many other things. And about to be a guest on this podcast in a couple of weeks. And Cahill, of course, is the CEO of the college.
Yeah.
uh,
Yep.
which is a remarkable place now. You would be amazed to walk into the doors of the doors and halls of the College of Surgeons. But so great experience, but sadly that exchange stopped for lots of reasons. Do you think it's a good thing for people to, the Irish are better travelers than the Americans for, again, multiple reasons. Do you think that concept of 6 months, 12 months, whatever, overseas in a different system, a different environment is educational?
Oh my goodness, yes. I think all of us who were involved with that, the way it was structured is in our fourth year, we spent half of the fourth year either at Oxford or in Dublin. At the time, it was at the Richmond Hospital, which has, now become the Beaumont. Um, it was fabulous just to see a different healthcare system. Even at that point, now, John, you got to take this, again with a historical context. We would have clinic on, I think it was Thursdays, or office hours, and we would we would get there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and there'd be a huge line out the door. The patients would come from all over Ireland. They didn't have a specific time. They would just show up for the day. And usually for the first, I don't know, 10, 15 patients, the professor would be there, but then he'd go off and do other important things and leave the rest of the clinic to us.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, even then, American patients would never put up with this. So it was just a very different system. One of the most effective things is for every patient that we saw, we hand wrote a letter to the primary care doc, handed it to the patient, who took it to the primary care doctor. So, now we have, Epic and all these ways of communicating, but that was brutally effective. It was 100% effective.
Going to say, 40 years later, we haven't made much progress.
No. So it was a fabulous experience for all of us. And I think for all of the Irish surgeons who came to work with us in the States, it was also, tremendously powerful. So I know it's it's tougher with regulations and legal issues and board requirements, but I think it was very powerful.
So there you are, Hopkins, cruising along. You've by virtue of birth and age, you happen to be there at the ground floor of laparoscopy and everything that involved. And, everybody went from nobody to somebody around the world. And then you spend a time waiting for this leadership opportunity. You ultimately went to San Diego. And I have two questions about that. How come San Diego compared to other places? Because I'm guessing there might have been one or two other opportunities. And secondly, the concept of following reasonably legendary figures, never easy to follow a legend. I mean, obviously, Marshall Orloff was there, and Babs Musa, etc. But talk to me about those two things. How did you get there? Why? And what was it like being there?
So a couple of things. The people immediately ahead of me at Hopkins, Charlie Yeo, Keith Lillimo. At Hopkins, we were pretty clogged up with great pancreas surgeons. So, given my father's tech interests and my geekiness, when the concept of laparoscopy, minimally invasive surgery, came along, it just really felt like an ideal fit for me. There is an interesting story as to how we got started at Hopkins. And I don't know if John Cameron will remember this way, but I'll tell you the way I remember it. There were a number of us interested in getting involved. Keith, Charlie, a guy named Tom Gadditz, who had been the chief out at the VA. And, we had been talking with Dr. Cameron about, going in this direction. And he was typical of that era, pretty skeptical, although in general, he was willing to be a very disruptive thinker, but about this, he was not at all convinced. At the time, I was spending a day a week at the VA in Baltimore. It was on Lock Raven Boulevard, and there was a guy named Carl Zucker who was one of the early innovators in minimally invasive surgery. Who was faculty at the University of Maryland, and he was spent a lot of time at the VA. So every Tuesday, I was at the VA with Carl all day. So I knew what he was doing. I knew he was involved. I knew he had gone down to Eddie Joe Reddick's course in Nashville and learned how to do laparoscopic cholecystectomy. And one day, Dr. Cameron called me into his office, and he said, "Mark, I had a patient scheduled for next week to have a cholecystectomy, obviously an open cholecystectomy, and a common bile duct exploration for common duct stones." He said, "That patient called me up today and canceled her case. I want you to find out if that patient went to Carl Zucker." So the next Tuesday, I was at the VA. I said, "Carl, did so-and-so come to see you for her cholecystectomy?" He said, "Not only did she come to see me," he said, "I'm taking her gallbladder out next Tuesday. I'm going to do her ERCP on Monday before I take her gallbladder out. And then I'm going to have her on the 6 o'clock news on Thursday." And that's exactly what happened. So I went back and told Dr. Cameron that. And he paused for a second and he said, "All right, we are going to do this. You get Lillibo, Yo, Gadditz, Henry Pitt. We're going to meet in my office tomorrow afternoon, and we're going to figure out how to do this." And we were really one of the first highly academic groups to do it. We got the equipment. We did work in the animal labs. We never actually went and took those courses. We were, how do you say, our egos were strong enough to believe that we could figure it out on our own, which is what we did. We did our first 50 patients with all 4 of us scrubbed, and then our second 50 patients with at least 2 of us scrubbed. And then we started teaching our residents. So that was an interesting story as to how we got going at Hopkins. With respect to San Diego, obviously it's heaven on earth. So from a place to live, even though it's 3,000 miles from Baltimore, that was an attractive thing. I think there were a number of things that were attractive about it. First of all, was the dean who was recruiting me was a guy named Ed Holmes, who had been the chair of medicine at University of Pennsylvania, the dean at Duke, and was the dean senior vice president out at San Diego. And he really went after me. In fact, he did something called a reverse site visit. He came to visit me in Baltimore. And I remember when this got scheduled, I went and talked to Dr. Cameron and said, "Dr. Cameron, he's coming here." I'd looked at a couple of jobs. I'd never had anybody do this. I said, "What should I do?" He said, "Here's what you do. Number 1, clean up your office. Make it spick and span. Number 2, turn your lab into a science fair. Have each of your fellows demonstrating a part of your lab work, your basic science work, your robotics work, Number 3, I'll set him up to talk to the dean here at Hopkins, the president of the hospital, the other people he needs to hear about how great you are. And then that evening, Ed took Carol and I out to dinner. And I remember during that dinner, the odd thing about that dinner is he barely talked to me.
Yeah.
He spent the entire dinner talking to my wife, Carol.
Yeah.
So he really went after us. But what was very attractive to me about San Diego, and which turned out to be true, is it's a very disruptive, creative, risk-loving environment. So I really thought, I'm a guy who loves change and I love growth. And those were two things that Ed said he wanted in a chair of surgery. And in fact, San Diego was a great place to be able to do those things. Natural orifice surgery and, some of the crazier stuff that we did out there. And uh, the dean wanted to substantially increase the size of the department's footprint. So I had a free hand to hire a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, that it's interesting. As the role of a chairman has changed over the last 30 years or more, many of the aspects of a chair have been, are easily managed by the administrative infrastructure. But the one thing they can't do is recruit faculty. It's no faculty takes a job because, and no offense to administrators, but getting a call from a vice president of operations doesn't move an academic surgeon. It's got to be another surgeon, and so that value is still there. Now, the second point was, your predecessors. Did you find it easy because you were very different in terms of what they were, or how do you deal with maybe still a bit of a shadow?
Yeah, I mean these were two great, well-known surgeons who were both still in the department, um, and viewed surgical innovation differently. No question. Um, but they were both terrific in terms of welcoming me and understanding what I was trying to do and supporting that effort. Both of them maintained what they were doing in significant ways. Dr. Musa was, he was a fabulous technical surgeon, um, clinically very active, international reputation, and certainly from the point of view of the department, it was great to have him there, bringing in patients. At the same time, I had a free hand to go recruit Andy Lowy to be the initial chief of a division of surgical oncology. He did build and he's continuing to build a great division there that has had real impact. So there was plenty of room for both.
7 or 8 years later, you fly back across the country. What was that for? The draw of home, or lots of money, or what?
Well, I would say it was a lot of things. A growth disruptive chairs probably have about a 10-year shelf life. And that may be the best shelf life for a lot of chairs anyway. We did a lot of things in San Diego that I don't think you could do in other places. We did this natural orifice surgery thing, which an IRB in San Diego was open to allowing us to do, and the population was open to have us do it. My friends in Boston and New York, they said, there's no way we can do this in Boston and New York. It's just the IRBs won't let us, and people have no interest in it. So we could do some things there that I think were unique. And just to jump on the natural orifice, story because that's another interesting story. There was a guy at Hopkins. His name was Sergei Kentsevoy. He was a Russian surgeon from Odessa who, if I remember the story correctly, his Russian surgical mentor was assassinated in Odessa in a political assassination. And Sergei decided, Russia's not the place for me. He came to the United States. He didn't want to do a full surgical residency in the United States, so he did GI. And he did his GI fellowship at Hopkins. And he called me down to the animal lab one day. And when I got there, he had a gastroscope sticking out through the stomach into the peritoneal cavity. He says, Mark, look what I can do through the stomach. He's showing me, the bowels and stuff. And I'm like, Sergey, are you out of your mind? You can't do that because, the surgical dogma is a hole in the stomach is a surgical emergency, right? Yeah. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, I'm going to put a stitch in this stomach when I take the scope back out through the wall. But he said, when you come back in 5 days and we sacrifice this animal and look at the stomach, you won't be able to find the hole.
Yeah.
And he was right. I came back in 5 days. So the learning was that the stomach, with its mucosal regeneration rate, heals much better than the fascia and the skin do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So once I realized that this avenue of inquiry was worth taking on. Anyway, that's a bit of a sidelight. So how did I get back to the East Coast? The chair of medicine at UC San Diego came to Stony Brook on the East Coast to be the dean, senior vice president of Stony Brook. And he had watched me grow the department in San Diego, and that's what he wanted to do on Long Island here at Stony Brook, State University of New York, Stony Brook. And, Carol and I loved San Diego, but we were basically East Coast people, and we did not see ourselves as retiring in San Diego. So it was a great place to be. We still have wonderful friends there. Absolutely love San Diego, but was good to get back to the East Coast. Even when we were in San Diego, my wife would drive around looking for like the 2 trees that would turn colors in the fall.
Yeah, the seasons. Yeah, for sure. So 7 years later, a really big change. Now you're permanently wearing a suit and tie and moving paper around. Talk to us about that transition.
Yeah, that's probably my biggest transition. There was a point at Stony Brook where somebody outside the organization said, you ought to talk to the folks at Northwell. And when I got to Stony Brook in 2013, Northwell was just beginning to really emerge as a system. So I sort of watched that evolve. I watched them, watched us now begin doing kidney transplant, consider liver transplant. So I was watching this thing grow and explode. And somebody outside the organization said, you really ought to talk to them. They're doing some amazing things. So I did, and I eventually got the opportunity to meet Michael Dowling, Mark Salazzo, Chief Operating Officer, Deb Schiff, who runs the business unit, David Battinelli, the dean here, and was just immediately captivated by the vision, the obsession with the culture, the growth, the risk tolerance, the willingness to try new things. Michael likes to say one of our biggest enemies is the status quo.
Yeah.
So it was pretty easy for me to make the jump from that point of view, even though this is a very different animal than Johns Hopkins or UCSD or Stony Brook. And what Michael said is, listen, we're growing like crazy. We uh, we need and want physician leaders. We'd love to have you come work in the Department of Surgery for a while and see what might come up. So I was here working with Gene Coppa in the department for about a year, and then the opportunity to become the executive director of the medical group here came up, and that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years.
Do you miss the surgery?
You know, I do. I do. But this is this is a different opportunity to have impact and to make a difference. So the privilege and opportunity of working fairly closely with Michael Dowling, with Mark Salazzo, these other great leaders, and watch the evolution of this system really has been captivating. And although I just viewed it would be too difficult to try and rebuild a practice like I have had in the past in this environment. What I do is I scrub with friends so that I make sure I get in the operating room environment and get my hands wet and cut some suture and whatnot. And for now, that answers the itch. But the other side of it has just been fabulous.
I think certainly my experience has been that if you have the opportunity or are fortunate enough to work with the best of the best in terms of talented administrative leaders, if you like, it's a privilege to watch them do their thing.
Yeah.
Think in a different way. And to coin a phrase that I sometimes tell people, they think no small thoughts.
That's true. And Michael is convinced, I certainly don't want to speak for him, he can articulate it far better than I, that coming out of COVID,
Yeah.
we're seeing almost a feverish pitch of mergers, acquisitions, new structures and ways that organizations relate to one another. And, as the margins get squeezed more and more, and it's harder and harder to finance care of patients in traditional ways, he is convinced that it's going to be the huge systems that will be the groups that make the difference, will be the change agents in healthcare in the coming 10, 15, 20 years. And as I watch, my old organizations struggle to be able to have resource to support research, support education, support even their clinical enterprises, it's not like we don't struggle here at Northwell. We have the same challenges, but we are at a scope and a scale where we can take advantage of efficiencies of scale that other places just can't. And we have a group of professional managers like Mark Salazzo and his team that do the finances and the operations at such a level of excellence that it really frees the physicians to pursue education, pursue research. And what's fun about this healthcare system, as opposed to perhaps others, is, we're very committed to recruiting difference makers, academic style physicians, as well as great clinical surgeons. And we can do that. We can do that.
It's interesting. I recognize the growth of systems and what I refer to as long COVID, in other words, the long-term consequences of COVID, and size does indeed matter. Um, a lot of that followed a decade of independent physicians becoming employed all the time as the challenges of being in private practice became more and more. They became more and more and more employed for the safety net, if you like, of the big organizations. One of the things that's I hear a lot about is that, yeah, okay, we're employed, and maybe it's the nature of the beast, or maybe it's a consequence of COVID. They increasingly don't like the organization that they're employed by, as in they find, in recent years, the organization is not a warm and fuzzy, nurturing place anymore. Show me the numbers, show me the money, and don't talk to me, just get on with it. And I hear that a lot out and about. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it certainly does. For an awful lot of physicians, particularly of our generation, their view was they were either going to control their own financial and clinical environments through ownership, or if they worked for an organization, they were going to have the opportunity to create John Monson Incorporated or Mark Talamini Incorporated and build what we want to do to make a difference. And when you're fully employed, that's a different kettle of fish. So I don't think that genie is going to go back in the bottle at this point, at least in the American healthcare system. Just by nature of the way the finances are. I mean, insurance companies make most of the money on healthcare in this country right now, I would say. The health systems, if you look at them, hospitals make 80 cents on the dollar, doctors make 20 cents on the dollar. And it's just the way the finances have gone. And so yeah, we are employed. Now, does that necessarily mean that our lives have to be miserable? I think the answer to that is no. And to me, that's a leadership issue. So again, singing Michael Dowling's praise, he's very clear that this is a mission-driven organization. Yes, we lose money on Medicaid. Yes, we lose money on psychiatry. We know we lose money on these things, but we make a margin so that we can do those things because it's important. We're the second largest provider of Medicaid in the state of New York here at Northwell, and we're proud of that. I think with respect to physicians, we are employees, but I would submit that for a given healthcare system, their physician workforce is their most important commodity or attribute. Because, you lose the wrong couple hundred physicians in any given year and you're in big, big trouble. So I think because it's the right thing to do and because we recognize how important our physicians are, we go to great lengths to, number one, try and support them in their practices, and number two, recognize them and celebrate them for the great work that they do. So we had our breakfast this morning for Doctors Day. On Tuesday, we're going to have a huge party called the Truly Awards. It's a 6-month endeavor. We ask people to nominate our physicians for a Truly Award. 1 out of 4 of our physicians was nominated. And so somebody took the time to write a nomination letter for 25% of our 5,000 physicians that are employed. And that all culminates in this big party where, Mr. Dowling gives out the awards like Academy Awards. And for us, I think this pays off. I mean, our physicians are at the 90th, close to the 90th percentile in physician likelihood to recommend, which I've not seen in any of my previous organizations. So the physician workforce has changed, but it's no less important. Now, I'll just say one other thing. Part of what has turned physicians' lives towards drudgery is the electronic health record, the need for data collection, the need for us to carry some of the administrative burden because some of it has to rise up to the decision maker. I believe that this now fourth wave of technology, right? First wave was computers, PCs. Second wave, the internet. Third wave, handheld devices. Fourth wave, artificial intelligence. This wave has the promise of taking away a lot of that drudgery if we play it right. So I think we really have the opportunity to give back to physicians more time with their patients and less time with their computers if that gets played right.
I think we're going to hold you accountable to that prediction. Let's see.
I hope I'm right.
So, in the last few minutes that we have available to us, I'm going to shift to pivot, I think is the correct term, and ask you a series of questions where you really don't get a lot of time to think about the answers, because I just need to peek under the hood a little bit. So what's your greatest extravagance?
I don't have a lot of extravagances. So I have a $4,000 custom-made guitar. I have a Boston Whaler in the backyard because we live on the water.
Excuse me, wait a minute. What about this no extravagances bit?
It's a 15-year-old Boston Whaler that I bought used, and I love my Tesla.
Okay.
I don't care about the politics. It's a great car. I spend 2 hours a day in it. I absolutely love it.
What's the missing talent you would love to have?
I would love to be a better musician.
Okay. If
I
you
can play, but I'm not great.
are you in the Jeff Matthews League or not?
Jeff is better than I am. And if you've ever seen his guitar collection,
Yeah.
holy cow, it's to die for.
Yeah, I don't know many chairs of surgery who, released a single last week,
That's right.
So have we already answered the question, therefore, if you weren't a surgeon, what would you be?
If I wasn't a surgeon, I would either be a helicopter pilot or a tugboat captain.
Those are both quite juvenile from childhood, but they'll do. Do you have a proudest moment in your career, or has that yet to come? People listening on the podcast are pressing buttons now.
I'm sorry. I would, in general, I'm proudest of the people that I've recruited and their success. So, one vignette for that would be Santi Horgan, who I recruited to San Diego, tremendously creative, energetic surgeon. I wouldn't want to testify in court to this, but I think we probably did the first or one of the first poem procedures in the country. And that was Santi's energy. I was privileged to be along with him. Once he realized what was going on, we flew to Japan. We got Olympus to give us the tools. We got the IRB to approve it, and we did it.
The people, it is a people thing. What is your ideal weekend?
Ideal weekend would be some music, and I play in our church a week or two a month. A long walk with my wife and the dog, and a chance to read.
The last question I want to ask you is, if you've just been told you have to stay in a log cabin for the weekend in the Vermont mountains, you can choose any two people from history to spend the weekend with you, not just an hour, but the weekend with you. Who would those two people be?
Oh boy.
They can be alive or dead.
It can be what? Alive or dead. Well, I'm going to put Jesus Christ aside.
Okay.
I would say Winston Churchill,
Okay.
who was just a fascinating figure, and Abraham Lincoln, who I think is the most transformative, impressive leader, president that we've had.
It would certainly be interesting to see them interact with each other as well.
Yes, it would.
Indeed, you could probably just slip to the side of the room and listen.
Yes. Take notes.
Exactly. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day. I'd appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you. I'm sure lots of people will find this equally entertaining and insightful.
Sure. A lot of fun. Thanks, John.